Welcome back. Today I'm going to read um, basically the last excerpt from The Poison Hill that I'm going to post. It's towards the end of the book. It's not quite the end of the book. So there'll be a little bit more that happens. And basically, Gertrude is trying to come to some sort of accommodation with David. She wants to apologize to him after the fight that occurred between him and Lewis, and she has sort of an idea of um, they might make like a platonic marriage. Um, and David is not really buying it, but um, they have a discussion about it and so on. So um, go ahead. On the screen porches, people were blurry white shapes, sitting out a little longer, keeping the evening alive. Nearly every yard was mowed short. Small moths fluttered up from the cut grass. They paused for a car sweeping around into an alley and crossed the street. Someone was turning a rusty clothesline. There was a glimpse down a side yard of a figure, headless like a dress dummy, amid shifting sheets. Today the wash, tomorrow the ironing, all the bustle of a weeknight, even a summer weeknight, all the need to keep up the pace, to take all joys as fleeting. For a second, all her old sunset worry, gone since Frances surfaced again. David was turning up the walk of his house, striding ahead of her. In the living room, they pushed the crystal set near the window and sat on the floor. David put the headphones on and moved the dial slowly around from one end to the other. After a while, he lifted the headphones off and put them over her ears. She heard a great howling and whistling, which died down into static and then, like the wind, started up again. She nudged the dial gradually over, and a voice jumped into her ears. To affect the tobacco crop, weather forecasters. She kept turning, and this blurred away into the clicking of percussion, and then an entire orchestra picking up the melody of Yes, We Have No Bananas. I'm getting music, she said. That's probably Chicago or Detroit. If you hear French, it's Montreal. She pushed the dial further back to the static and dangled one of the earphones off to reduce the noise. What is all that noise? The static? Radio waves. Are they there all the time, just bouncing around out there in outer space? Yep. Even before we knew we were there, for millions and millions of years, they've just been there, bouncing around? Yeah. David took the earphones back from her carefully without touching her hands. Makes you feel kind of small, doesn't it? Not small so much as dizzy. It was strange to be sitting in the living room with all the layers of outer space, the universe itself, on the headphones. Strange to be stretched out talking to David about it and not looking, not saying anything else. She turned a little and saw long dead Mr. Roy watching them. What did your father die of? David knocked the volume down on the dial. What did you say? What did your father die of? Gertrude pointed at the picture. David leaned over and stubbed his cigarette out in the ashtray between them. Who said he was dead? Isn't he? She looked at the painting again. If he isn't, where is he? David took the headphones off and picked up the ashtray. California or something. He ran out on us. Sometimes I get a telegram from him. You mean your parents are divorced? I guess so. Don't you know? Well, Ma doesn't like to talk about it. I think that's why he went out west to get a divorce. But Ma never said in so many words. You know, she never quite lies about it, but she always makes people think he's decently departed. That's why she keeps his picture up. David got up and emptied the ashtray. When he came back, he began to wind the cord around the headphones and put them away. It was pitch dark outside. You hungry? A little. I might be able to find, he began. At the same time, she said, we could go get a cup of coffee or something. They both paused. Then he said, all right. While he put the set away, she went to the phone and called her mother. I'm at David's, she said, and because it would give her mother hope and mean that she would raise no objection to her being out late, I may be here a while. We're talking things over. Well, don't be too late. I won't. David will bring me home. Is Louis back yet? But her mother had already hung up. Waiting in the car as he went back to close the garage door, Gertrude took her gloves off and put them back on, mechanically, thinking about what she would find to say to him. She wondered where Louis was, if he wasn't lying on a speakeasy floor somewhere in West St. Paul. The movie theater on Grand was just letting out. People were hurrying home under the streetlights. The trolley was stopped in the center of the street with a line of people waiting to climb on. They drove several blocks without speaking. Drugstores and restaurants were lit up along the streets. The exuberant cathedral, the great bald domed head shone on the skyline. Apartment buildings had been built on the same lines, great castles with turrets and arches. The trees softened and blurred the lights. They stopped at a drugstore just downtown and ate hamburgers without haste or conversation. Somehow everything had ceased to be awkward. They might be a married couple on a trip, stopping for a quick meal before heading somewhere up north, aiming for the border by morning. When they got back in the car, David said, "You want to go anywhere in particular?" No. Gertrude was not sure if this might not make him turn for home, but he pulled the car out in the wrong direction for that and drove towards the river. They rode along 7th and crossed the bridge, the only car coming from St. Paul. The headlights cut around as David turned off it, dropping the car down away from the streetlights into complete darkness along the river. They shone on the leaves of the trees, stirring in the wind, and on a parked car with the lights off. David stopped at the next curve and pulled over. It was completely dark. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. 6 months ago they had stood somewhere near here in the biting cold, the sun already sinking through the bare trees along the horizon. She hadn't wanted to go back to the car where Louis was sulking. And then David had proposed. The sky to the west had been pale with sunset, and she had thought of the oncoming darkness, of the lights that would blink on in nameless houses as they drove home, of the cold outside and the knife-edge comforts of winter, the oil smell of the heat from the registers and Sunday dinners of roast pork and apples, the knitted gloves and wet boots, and the blanket-like nights which made you feel safe and warm because you had a place, a home, a name. On the way home afterwards, as they sat at stoplights, David's hand had crept over and held hers loosely until the light changed. Once the car behind them honked its horn and they parted quickly, David sitting forward while she tried not to laugh, at least not so loudly that Louis would notice. "You want to get out?" David asked now. He opened the door. She could not see the bluff edge in the darkness, and so she stayed close to the car, edging around the front to where David stood. She could hear the trees around them brushing each other, turning their leaves over in the wind from some far-off storm. "You think it's going to rain?" "Nah, just heat lightning." The breeze smelled of the stockyards and the dark river. "Louis knew you were going to propose to me, didn't he, that time we were here?" David had his hands in his pockets. She could just pick out his profile turned slightly away from her. "He knew I was going to propose to you. I don't guess he knew exactly when." "And he approved?" "Sometimes." "Sometimes?" Louis was given to changing his mind about things. His voice was chilly. He'd never cared for Louis, she thought, not the way Louis cared for him. And Louis, lying on the bed in the candlelight, without a moment's thought, a moment's hesitation, he was confident she would sacrifice her entire future, her entire life, just so he could believe that no one else would ever matter to David as he had mattered. "I wasn't going to cheat you, Gertrude. I wasn't. I told you that. I like you. I've always liked you." "I've always liked you." Year after year he had stepped into the front hall, sweeping his dark eyes over her, coming from basketball practice, home from Princeton. "Hi, Gertrude, Louis here." She had always known that he liked her. It had always been enough. Not because it was second best, but because it had a different quality from the slippery fantasies, piling and building on themselves, of love. He liked to make her talk, though he listened sardonically. He flung words at her. He remembered from months past things she had already forgotten. "You got any cigarettes?" "No. Well, I have one. Do you mind Fatima's?" Gertrude felt down into her purse where the Fatima had resided for a week. "I don't want to take your last one." "No, I was saving it, that's all." She tipped the purse back and forth. "Here it is." Something came out with it and fell on the grass. "What was that?" "I don't know. Whatever it is, it's gone." Gertrude knelt down and felt blindly around on the grass. David went back to the car and pulled the headlights on. The beams cut through the darkness of midair. "I'll back it up," he said. "It's not important. I'm sure it's not important." She was on her knees, feeling around. The car eased back, and the grass at her feet was illuminated. A large shadow near her feet, just a leaf, another leaf and a stick, and then another large flat black patch, the wooden token the crippled man had given her. "Here it is. I told you it's not important." David came around and took it from her hands. In the glare of the beams, he turned it until the long eyelash flapper was struck directly on. What's this from? The fair? I guess so. A man begging on the street gave it to me. I don't know why. His hand had closed over the token. A gust of wind, damp from the river, swirled her hair, and she turned her face to avoid it. 3 years? He asked. 3 years? We'll try it for 3 years, and then we sit down, and if it hasn't worked or one of us wants our freedom, we can end it. And if it's okay, we'll continue. Lightning flickered again over St. Paul, showing the skyline black and twisted. It was the city offered to her. All this can be yours, a half-second's chance. The dream of Sunday winter evenings, of standing in the front hall while David quizzed her on South America, of the days when he had been the handsome boy she was going to marry. How fairy tale like it was that he should be the prince, when it turned out it was not marriage she had wanted all along, but life.